I spent last weekend, as you know, in Washington, and I was in the House of Studies of the Dominican Fathers. They have 71 men in the house, and to hear them chanting or singing evening prayers with in harmony was something magnificent. And of course, they fed me like I'd never been eaten before. I'd never had eaten before. I was very getting to know them all in there now. Some of them come up to meet me, the students, etc. Then I ended up in Fort Meade, and had to be past security, etc. It was quite an experience there. So, my friends, I wrote something for you, and I couldn't locate it on the computer today, on the notion of a Catholic philosophy. There's no such thing as a Catholic philosophy any more than there is a Catholic mathematics or a Catholic chemistry. But, yes, you're right to look puzzled. There is such a thing as Catholic in its state, or if you like, Christian in its state. There is such a thing. In other words, if, for instance, a professor of philosophy says you can he's supposing he's what we've got at the moment, biologist, saying there is no God. He's wrong, because we can prove with utter scientific rigor that there is a God. If he says there is a God, he's still wrong, because he's outside his field. And we'll see, as we go along, what is the proper field. So it's one thing to be able to say that you're in your field and you can come to a conclusion. That's good. Well, I've just come back, as you know, from the Catholic Academy of Sciences in the United States of America, to give it its full title. And I heard men talking about all sorts of things happening in the world today, and it's extraordinary what's going on. But then you know as much about that as I do from lots of sources, I'm quite sure. But a philosophy can be Christian in its state. What that means is that it agrees with Christian conclusions or assumptions, for instance. Is there a God? Is there life after death? Well, we prove those things, and we're going to do it in this classroom. We can prove those things. It's not a matter of belief. There's too much darn belief in the world today. That's called fideism, from the Latin word fides, meaning faith, faithism. Even at a departmental meeting at Niagara University, a philosopher who they ushered in as somebody who was a great teacher. We witnessed his presentation of his teaching in a classroom one day, and he's one of the worst teachers I've ever seen. I mean that. But because somebody had an interest in him being there, they said, oh, he's a great teacher. Well, he didn't stay long. He got fed up with the place and walked out. But he said to me at a meeting something about beliefs. And I hear that word everywhere today, beliefs. What beliefs do you have? My belief is this. I detest the word. I'm beginning to really almost feel like vomiting every time I hear the word belief. It's called fideism. Believe in them. You believe this, you believe that. I don't believe you're there. I know you're there. I can see you there. And I can defend the act of vision in the science of metaphysics, that part of it we call epistemology, where we do a critical evaluation of knowledge. And I know you are there because I can defend that. So there's life after death. I can defend that. We'll be dealing with that in this course. Oh, I forgot to turn it on. So, my friends, we start again tonight, and with a little revision. It is important to realize the difference between living things and non-living. Living things have imminent action, you might remember we said last time. That is to say, I do the act of eating, I benefit from the act of eating. I do the act of seeing, I benefit from the act of seeing. That's called imminent action. It means it remains within me. But transitive action is all that non-living things can do. Transitive action. For instance, the wind blows a tree over. The wind does the action, the tree benefits from the action, if you can call that a benefit. But the agent that does the act is one thing, and what receives the act is another thing. That's characteristic of non-living things. But living things, one does the action, and the same living thing benefits from the action. I can see Heather. She mightn't even know I'm here in the room. I'm doing the act of seeing her, and I benefit from the act of seeing her. I nearly said I suffer from the act, but I won't say that. But we do say that. The hot coffee heats the spoon, and the spoon suffers the action, or benefits from the action, whichever way you look at it. So that's the basic distinction. We're going to apply all through this. Even the intellect, the will. I might do a transitive action by pushing this. Living things can do transitive actions too, like non-living things. But to remind you, the two words, transitive. That one won't work. Let's see if this one works. Trans, across, plus it. It in Latin means goes. Remember, one author says that the English language has got 80% of Greek and Latin words. It used to be a lot of Latin. Now they're switching a lot of Greek into English. Goes across. That's what's characteristic of non-living things. Goes across from one thing to another. But living things are... Man means remain in Latin. Maneo, I remain. Within the thing. So I do the eating and I benefit from the eating. It remains within me, the effect. So that's a basic thing. In other words, living things remain in tension. What does that mean? It means that two things, say, remain apart. Like the organs, all our organs. They don't run down to zero. They don't run down to equilibrium. They don't run into a mess. For instance, if I put on the desk here, or the table here, I put kidney. In Ottawa, I one day said I had a whole lot of graduate nurses, all registered nurses working for a Bachelor of Science degree. I had about 135 or 40 or something like that. And I said, if I put a kidney here, and I put the lungs here, and the heart all together, there was a giggle went up, and I said, what's the matter? One woman said to me, you said kidneys, and you should say kidneys. I said, that's what I said, didn't I? She walked right into my trap. So, but those things, if I put them on the desk there, some human organs, and you came in the classroom, say, next Friday, you'd say, woo, that pongs, doesn't it? So you wouldn't want to come in the classroom. But yet, I see them all sitting in front of me now, and I want to come into the classroom. In other words, they all remain apart. In tension, we call that. In other words, they don't run down to zero. Each remains apart and doing its function. But as soon as we die, what happens? They all run down and melts. Gives off gases and liquids, etc. So we'll see why that is presently. But that's characteristic of the living things. I remember hiking. We used to hike through the Royal National Park in Australia, and I can remember in the spring, water's rushing and things are happening, and dampness and rotting vegetation for some reason or other. But you could always smell that rotting vegetation. Then some friends of mine came across. I suppose he was a hobo, the poor fellow of some kind, living under a bridge on the highway. They found his decaying body. So, would somebody please turn that off there? Is it there? Oh, is that what it is? Yes. So, they found this man. His body was decaying. And I told you about what we found. A man had fallen from 7 stories last time. If the non-living could stay in tension, that's to say, stay apart, then if we had a sort of a alarm clock or something with its key turned up, it would stay all in tension, all wound up all the time. Or if you put hot water and cold water together, they'd stay apart all the time. But that's characteristic of living things, not non-living things. So, I've given you a definition of tension there in your notes. And by the way, if anybody's not getting the notes, please let me know. We want to tie that up as well as we can. So what is death? It's the loss. This is the first definition. There's more to it than this. It's the loss of that immanent power, that power to perform immanent actions. That's its proper function, or proper definition, if you like. So, we'll have more to say about that shortly. And don't get confused. In fact, I was just hearing some of this, discussing with the scientists down in Washington, D.C. Don't fall for this brain death rubbish. Complete rubbish. Physicians are disowning that now, quite a lot, especially the scientists there. That brain death is just a useful rule of thumb to take somebody's heart out. Well, what are you doing? You're killing them. You're committing murder when you take their heart out. Remember that. If they're alive, that is. And it is said that a thing is alive till about 8 hours after apparent death. We'll say more about that. Now, there are signs of that mode of operation characteristic of living things, imminent action. There are signs of that. One of them is irritability. Now, irritability means there is a specific reaction to a stimulus, a specific reaction. For instance, how does the eye behave? As soon as light's on, you see the pupil contract when the light comes on, and it expands when the light is off. That's irritability. It's a fundamental property in the whole organism. And I've given you a definition of it there. It is my own thought that we hear about cows will give milk up when music is playing. Cows cannot appreciate music. Excuse me. That's an intellectual function. And we'll see later that cows do not have intellect. Brute animals do not. But it is my own opinion, and just an off-the-cuff opinion, that irritability will explain that. For some reason, the music stimulates something in the cow's blood or nervous system or something like that, and it gives up her milk much easier. The mimosa plant, you touch it and it shrivels. I mentioned last time, I remember that the botanical gardens where I was one day, I'm watching little boys. They had all these mimosa plants lined up, and they're going along touching them, and you see that branch drops like that straight away. It reacts by a reaction of irritability. The second sign of this kind of action is internal finality. Now, finality comes from the Latin word finis, meaning end, the end for which it functions. The finality means what it aims at. So, internal finality, all the functions that go on in us operate for us, not for something external. The stomach feeds the body, the brain, etc., and that feeds the intellect. We'll see that more of that as we go along. So that's internal finality. That's a second illustration of or sign of imminent action. I think I mentioned last time about my own dad's place in Sydney, Australia, where there was a drum. I mentioned this, I think I remember now. And a seed got in this big oil drum. A seed got in there, and a shoot went up there, another one went down there. This is called a geotropism. Geotropism, which means it seeks the earth. And this one is called a heliotropism. It seeks the sun. Now that's a stimulation, that's an action of irritability. And it's internal finality, because what is it doing? It needs the light of the sun in order to carry on all the growth function here. And it needs the nutrition from the earth. That's an excellent example of irritability and of imminent action. You'll notice on one of your pages there, you'll find I have a certain kind of comparison which is good. Living over non-living. That's all I need to put on here. You can see them in your notes. And imminent action compared with transitive action. So that'll give you an idea how you can sort of compare these things and sum them up. Then, little d, the living necessarily requires organization. Organization means a part functioning for a specific operation. So living necessarily requires operation. Why? This is the reason. Nothing can give itself what it hasn't got. Nothing can give itself movement. So what happens in living things? Part moves part. There's a fundamental principle. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. So part moves part within the whole organism, in all living things. Even the tiny little one-celled animals called the spirella. This is what they call the ciliates. These are little, sort of like little branches that cause the thing to move around. They've found enormous complexity. One little cell. You've got a very high-powered microscope to see that. But it's enormously complex. They're all called organs. A physician will call the liver an organ. But the philosopher will say every part of the liver is an organ, whatever specifically aims at a specific function. Always keep in mind that when a scientist uses terms, they're different from the way the philosopher uses them. So when the philosopher is talking about matter and the physicist is talking, or the chemist is talking about matter, we're using the term in two different ways. We'll see that later. Now we come to chapter 3, the principle of vital operation. What is it that causes something to have a vital operation, to have this imminent action, this operation in which the thing operates for its own self? There are different teachings. But first we'll have to go, to understand it properly, we'll have to go, I think it would be a good time to do it now, perhaps just in a few minutes after we've done some of this first. Let me say this. Every body has a form, but now the question is, does a living body have a special kind of form? You see, in a course in which we do the whole of nature, philosophy of nature, we'd be dealing with non-living things first, but now we're working on living things. Everything has all bodily things have two principles. One which is called matter, one which is called form. Students have a great difficulty with this idea of form. It's very simple. I'll get a piece of paper, scrap paper or something. I think I've got some here. Yeah, this will be, thank you. Whiteness is one thing. But here there are two whitenesses. There are more whitenesses. Whiteness is multiplied. We call the principle that multiplies the whiteness, we call it matter. Matter is what receives form. Form is what makes a thing be what it is. Look, here's matter. Whiteness is one thing. Look, there's a whiteness, 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 there's a what? Their eyes, no, they're bloodshot. So, whiteness is one thing, but it needs matter to multiply it. So we call whiteness the thing that makes a thing be what it is, we call form. The inside fixer. It's not a complicated thing. It's very simple if we just quietly think about it. See, there are 10 different kinds of forms. One form makes it be matter. One other form makes it be white. Another form makes it be square, etc. So, is there something in living things that makes them be special, that makes them be alive? Well, everybody has recognized that. Even the headhunters of New Guinea, which I've sort of had a lot of interest in, I was trying to do a trade. I was giving them one of my heads for two of theirs, you see. And we sort of, these headhunters, they thought even the steaks, by the way, they're the most beautiful gardeners in the world, so it is said, the New Guinea people in certain, the Bololo Valley and places like that, which is just north of Australia, that big island there, which was fierce headhunters. And, but they thought even the steaks that they had in the ground, the gardens, even they had a special form, a living form. Some things are non-living, like gold is non-living, but it has form of gold. Silver is non-living, it has form of silver. And everything you can think of, nothing can exist without, nothing bodily can exist without this form. But there must be form. Even if there's no matter, there must be form. Whatever makes a thing be what it is. That's simply that, the inside fixer. But it needs another principle to multiply it. We call that matter. And as we divide the matter, so we divide the form. Look, the whiteness is divided. I divided the matter, so it divides the form. Now I divide it again. There are four individual forms. Whiteness is of itself one thing. But when I divide the matter, I divide the form. The form goes with it. Now what the question is this. Gold is not living. And by the way, right through civilization and before civilization, such as in the New Guineans and other places, they all held that there's a special kind of form for living things. Obviously, the form gives the thing its existence and its mode of operation. So what makes it do these actions, the living actions, as distinct from non-living actions? The form. But men have called the form of living things a different name from the other living. Can anybody tell me what it is? In Old English it used to be written as S-A-W-O-L, Sowol. That's in Old Anglo-Saxon. And then it became soul. Then it became soul, through the evolution of languages. Often just from the way people pronounce the word, it takes on a new change in shape. So it comes from a very common Teutonic word. English is a Teutonic, Anglo-Saxon word, as you know. And in a class one day, a colleague of mine in Ottawa experienced this. Sir, I object to that word soul. That's a religious word. My friend said, do you know what we're studying? We're studying psychology. Yes. What do you think that means? Soulology. Psyche in Greek means soul. So psychology means soulology. So don't you ever use the word in my classroom psychology from now on, the teacher said. Then he said also animal. What do you think the word anima? Psyche, or psyche if you like, that's Greek. Anima is Latin. And both words mean soul. So don't you ever use the word animal or psychology in my class, since the student had asked the teacher not to use the word soul. So all it means is the principle within a thing that makes it be alive. Now, there are three teachings concerning the existence and nature of a special principle of life, the soul. There are three different teachings about that. Maybe I should put them on the board here. Where's the...
Eraser?
Yeah.
There's a tissue up here.
No, of course it is. I carry my own. I paid 25 cents for it one day. There was one here last week, but they keep disappearing. Somebody walks off with them. Yes, I picked it up. You'd be surprised what I picked up at garage sales. Things like this, and binders, and blondes. What am I saying? So there are three different teachings about this. There's first of all what's called philosophical mechanicism. Philosophical mechanicism. Now, philosophical mechanicism means there's no special principle. No special principle. It's just the form like any other non-living form. There's no difference between a living thing and a non-living thing, according to these people. All the actions are just transitive actions. Professor Little in the University of Sydney once said, Aristotle pointed out that there's only one, what did he call it again? Can't think of the term he used. One little point of difference between a living thing and a non-living thing. He was a biochemist, a very ignorant one at that. He didn't know Aristotle, that was obvious. So then there's extreme vitalism. Extreme vitalism. I'm no writer on the blackboard, a very bad writer. This means there's just one principle, just matter. This means there are two principles. One which is a soul and one which is matter. Soul and matter equals like a boy on his bicycle equals two substances. Now Descartes and Plato were very famous for this. You know Descartes, he was a French mathematician turned philosopher. He had a brother who was called Nightcart.
There he goes.
So, not everybody has lived in the country and doesn't know what a night cart is. But then there's a third one, which is called animism. And this has a teaching called hylomorphism. This one says there's one principle for living things. This one says there are two principles, two separate principles related to each other like a boy riding on a bicycle. This one says there are two principles, but they're united as one substance. One substance. This one cannot account for imminent action. It cannot account for it. This one, the boy acting on a bicycle, the soul operating on matter, that doesn't explain it either. That's transitive action. The only one which explains it is matter and form. Form, matter equals one substance. Whoops. It's the only theory which can explain living substance. Descartes was a very proud, ignorant man. He decided to set out and teach philosophers of all times. Philosophy started about the 6th century BC. 26 centuries ago, philosophers started to be developed by men. And everybody standing on the shoulders of others always developed philosophy. And Descartes was going to wipe all that out and do it all again. And he introduced mathematical method into philosophy. Result is he went into enormous errors. He's the father of modern psychology. He's the father of modern philosophy, the mess, as we often call it, the father of the mess. I was up in Michigan on one occasion and stayed with my brother in a motel, and a woman with an accent from Europe, I don't know what she was, I can't remember now, but she was talking about, I said I wanted to see the Great Bridge there and show it to my brother since he was an engineer. And she turned to me and said, "What do you do?" I told her, and she proceeded to instruct me on philosophy, tell me all about it. And I made a remark about the modern mess caused by Descartes, and no two philosophers agree on anything today, practically. And she was shocked that I would call Descartes the modern mess, the father of the modern mess. So, the big thing is, which of these is true? This one is called, by the way, exaggerated vitalism. Oh, extreme or exaggerated vitalism. And it does not account for living substance. Because living substance isn't transitive, one thing operating on another, it's operating on itself. That doesn't work. Then this one doesn't account for anything either. It's sort of an incomplete explanation of living substance. And, you know, the nutrition, for instance, operates in the cell of the body. We'll see that presently. But it doesn't account for it there. Marxist philosophical mechanicism, materialists, sensists, positivists, behaviorists, many scientists, Marxists, Hegel, Huxley, Herbert Spencer, Darwin. What we call methodological mechanicism work as if everything's mechanical. Yes, we do that in medicine, we do it in pharmacology, we do it in all sorts of sciences. We operate as if things are just material things in front of us. But it's not a sufficient philosophical explanation to really explain the second of two modes of moving, namely transitive action or immanent action. This is not sufficient to explain it. Just doesn't explain it at all. This one, neither does that explain it. That's just transitive action, the boy operating on the bicycle. Well, Descartes taught that, and he said that the pineal gland in the brain is where the soul is attached. How, after all the great teaching of the Middle Ages and the inheritance of say, Aristotle and the Greeks and the great Arabs and Persians, how can a man talk like that? Only from profound ignorance. He just sat by a fire and said, I've got to rethink all philosophy. That's why men speak of him as being quite arrogant. So, the soul and matter form one substance. That's the only sufficient explanation. We'll see more about that in a moment. So there's a special form in living substances which we call soul. The unity of soul and body is evident. I mean, you go into a hospital and somebody's been put in the morgue, like a friend of mine was put in the morgue, screaming, I'm not dead, I'm not dead. She and her husband were driving south of Sydney, and the car, the shoulder of the roadway, it's a main highway, the Princess Highway, and the shoulder gave way and the car rolled down the hill. And they brought her in and she heard them say, this one's dead, take her to the morgue, the brain was exposed. And boy, when they see somebody like that, and then suddenly somebody sees a finger move, and they knew she wasn't dead, you know that there's a difference between living things and non-living things. Very quick, smart. So there cannot be any coordination without subordination. That's a principle of reason. There cannot be a coordination without subordination. So the soul maintains the living substance in tension. Remember the heap of organs. The living soul, this is in the notes for you, by the way, I've typed all this in there for you. So today, matter for the scientist is body taken in general. Here's a typical example of where the terminology of a scientist and of a philosopher are different. And matter for the philosopher comes down from centuries of usage. Matter for the science is body taken in general, just any bodily thing without specific differences such as one's a plant, one's a brute animal, one's a man. Just body means any kind of material thing. That's how the scientist uses it. How the philosopher uses it is anything which receives form. The multiplying principle of form. The individuating principle of form. That's how the philosopher uses it. The individual, or the multiplying principle, is matter. So what is death? It's the loss of the soul, because primary matter has an appetite for other forms. If somebody ate, say, or rather, put it this way, if a lion ate a dog, then the form of the dog is lost, but the form of the lion is taken on. There's a change of form. And when somebody's dying, they don't lose their shape immediately. Lesser forms take over. So death is the loss of the substantial form, which brings up another point. There are 10 different kinds of form. Therefore, there are 10 different kinds of being. One is called substantial form, so it makes it be a substance, and the other 9 are called accidents or accidental forms. We'll have reason to talk about them later. 10 different kind of forms. One causes a thing to be the substance, one which causes it to have all the accidents, others which cause it to have the accidents. For instance, the human mind is an accident of the soul. The color of the skin is an accident of the body. Now, accident, where we often get tricked up with the word accident. Does it mean it had an accident? Whatever befalls something, that's what an accident is. Whatever befits something or befalls it. So there are 9 different kinds of accidents. We'll talk about them presently. So death means the loss of the substantial form. That's the point I want to emphasize here. And the matter can have different kinds of forms. For instance, when you eat a fish, you don't become a fish. When you eat a fish, it takes on you.
Excuse me.
Certainly, you pose it upon the fish, your own form. It loses the form of fish and takes on the form of man. So that's a change of substantial form. So death then is the loss of that form, loss of the substantial form. So proof, you haven't got your notes with you, have you?
Page 11.
Yes.
Page 11.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, page
11.
12 now. The proof that animism is true. Soulism, if you like. I'm going to put that, you see the diagram there? It's on page 12, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes.
I didn't get that section.
Let's put it this way. There's a famous principle. Do follows be. Put it this way. Here's a dog. Here's a cat. Here's a tree. Everything operates according to its nature. A dog will do like a dog does, and a cat will do what a cat does, and a tree will do what a tree does. So everything operates according to its nature. The principle of reason, we've spoken about principles of reason before. Let me explain the principle of reason in full. Do follows be. It does be a dog, so it does like a dog. Do follows be, and the mode of doing follows the mode of being. Now that's set out in that page for you. So do follows be. There are 2 kinds of do, transitive and imminent. Therefore, there are 2 kinds of be. Non-living and living. You remember we spoke about the philosophical act, what a philosopher does. In the beginning we explained that. The philosopher does, he judges facts in the light of the principles of reason. Here's a fact, here's a principle, and here's a conclusion. The fact, here's the principle, do follows be. Here's the fact. But there are 2 different kinds of do's, here's the conclusion. Therefore, there are 2 different kinds of beings, living and non-living. Now, there's a rather primitive proof, but yet a very important one. There are a number of proofs about this, that living things are different from non-living things. But this is the principal one we're going to use. So, as I've got the principle in a non-living thing, we call it form. The principle in the living thing, we call it living form, or shorthand way, soul. This is just called, we generally call this just the form. We'll call this soul. Well, strictly, I suppose, we really should put them over here. Yes, non. I think it'd be much better to put this over there. This is non. Oh, this is living. I'm sorry. Messing things up a little bit there. So this is the philosophical act, what a philosopher does. He takes a principle of reason, and in his mind, he illuminates a fact. Namely, there are two different kinds of actions. Therefore, he concludes that there are two different kinds of beings. And since every operation follows some form, therefore, there are two different kinds of principles. Or we'll call this soul. I don't know what I've written there. This is just called form. Yes. Sorry about that. This is called form, non-living things. This is called soul for living things. You won't find anybody objecting to that. Anybody that knows that sees it straight away. There's a proof that there is a soul in living things. Now we're going to see there are three different kinds of living things, and therefore there are three different kinds of souls among bodily things. So the principle in a living thing is called vital form or soul. Each being has its form, just as the mode of operation, so is the mode of form. So there's a philosophical proof. It could be elaborated, yes, it could be elaborated enormously if you wanted to, but we can do some of that later. But every philosophical proof is done in that style. A principle of reason, which is defended in a part of metaphysics called epistemology. A principle of reason, which if you deny it, you're in utter absurdity. The best thing to do then is to keep your mouth shut and don't deny it, because otherwise you make yourself look a fool, because you assume that there's principles of reason which are denying principles of reason. I mentioned I've mentioned before about the lad who says nothing is certain, and there was an explosion of laughter amongst the scientists when I told them what I did. I had occasion to mention that during the questioning of my paper, and how I told them that one lad said that nothing is certain. And I said to him, "You're certain of that?" No, I'm not certain of that. They said, "But you're certain that you're not certain of that?" "No, I'm not certain." He said, and he was getting a little flustered, and I said, "Look, you're certain that you're not certain that you're not certain of that?" And then I said, "Oh, I'm all mixed up. Let's try it again." I said, "You're saying you can be certain, I'm saying you can't be certain." No, he said, "You're saying you can be certain." So I said, "You're certain of the difference." And walked right into my trap. It must have affected him tremendously, because it changed his life. Father Martinelli of the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Montreal told me, he said, "I heard you had with Monsieur, whatever his name was again, you had a little talk with him." And he said he reacted, he was to come back and study in the Faculty of Philosophy, whereas he had abandoned it and joined the Communist Party. Anyway, it had an effect on him. So what we're looking for is the cause of the fact. Here's the fact, and when the conclusion gives us the cause. So this is what the philosopher does. Principles of reason, and we're going to see this more and more as we go along, and facts, and the cause of the fact. The cause that living things are different is they have a substantial form, which is we call a vital form or soul. So
that's a Joe Biden.
So I've set that out for you there. And since they're different, we're going to see that there are different kind of forms, different kind of souls. So now we come to chapter 3b, degrees of principle of life. I must apologize, my notes are not exactly the same as yours. The reason is I'm using the last time we did this course, but you've got much improved notes, so you might be just a jump ahead of me with the numbering of the pages. Mine are not numbered for some reason. So is there any problem with what we've done so far? By the way, what's the time there? I can't see it. There's a light against it. It's a bit slow, isn't it? So, any problem with that? Can anybody... Yes?
Can I have a quote?
Yes, sure.
St. Thomas of Aquinas once made a quotation in his book that the intellectual mind and the soul is one. Can you elaborate on that?
No, he didn't say that.
Yes,
no,
he did.
No.
Well, I'll bring the book. Okay.
I've got it in about 5 languages, believe me, and I know them well. This is what he said. The intellect is an accident of the soul. The intellect has powers of operation, but they're not identical. One belongs to the other. The soul is the principle of the living thing. But the living thing has all these powers. Intellect, will. These are powers of operation. We call them operative powers, and we're going to study all of them. But these belong to the soul. They're not the soul, they belong to it. We have four internal senses, the cogitative power, sensitive memory, imagination, and sense consciousness, and then we have 11 basic passions, etc., etc., etc. They all belong to the soul. They're not the soul, but they belong. See the difference? They belong to it.
Well, I assumed that he was referring to, as we know, as the subconscious mind.
Well, let's come to
The
that later.
intellectual mind and subconscious mind.
Well, let's
you know,
come.
and the soul.
Let's stick to
one.
this at the moment. There's no such thing as the subconscious mind, but we'll talk about that later. Any questions on this that we've studied tonight so far? No? Good. So, degrees of principle of life now. Are there different degrees of soul? The principle of life is soul, but are there different degrees? So, diverse operations argue to the existence of diverse principles. In other words, we've got here soul. Now, we'll see that there are 3 degrees of immanence, therefore 3 degrees of soul. You see, that's the immanence is to be done in 3 different ways, and so the soul is 3 different kinds of souls. Just to shortcut it: plant, brute animals, and man. So there are 3 degrees of bodily life. If they do differently, then they be differently. In an act, 3 things must be considered, and I've written them all down there for you. I can't see that clock because the
About 7 minutes.
the light, there's a light shining right on the thing. So let me explain that now. 3 things must be taken into account in any action. There's the exercise of the act, the very doing of the act. There's the purpose of the act. And there's the form of the act. So those 3 things. There's the exercise, the very doing of the act. There's the form of the act. And there's the purpose of the act. Those 3 things we must take into account. So, first we have plants. Now, plants do their actions. They do the exercise of the action. They carry it out. But what action do they carry out? It's fixed by nature. So it doesn't give itself the form of the act, nor does it give itself the purpose of the act. Plants just carry out the action, the exercise. They're responsible for the exercise of the act, the doing of it. Now, brutes. In other words, non-rational animals. Yes, a dog certainly carries out the action, but it's going to see the hare. So it gives itself the form of the action. Will it chase the hare? Will it go to a telegraph pole and, or does it chase the car? Or does it chase a sparrow? It gives itself the form of the action. But it does it instinctively. It doesn't give itself the purpose of the action. So I warn people about that with animals. I've seen them on some of these shows on television where they show you that people have always gone along well with a wonderful animal and suddenly it turns against them. Don't assume rationality in an animal. A girl in Australia on one occasion was playing with a kangaroo, and kangaroos will sort of push one another back. And this young lady's interpreting that, oh look, it likes me, it's playing with me. That's your vision of it. I said, Kathleen, get the hell out of it. I said, away from that kangaroo. It's bigger than she is, about 6 feet tall. But she was assuming all it had to do was go back as they do on the tail, big tail they've got, and up come the hind legs with claws like that. And I had to go and grab her and drag her away from the thing. You just don't know what the animal does. Oh, he likes me, he's playing with me. Yeah. Like the man in Ceylon I read about on one occasion. He had a panther. It was a wonderful pet. And he always played with this, and he'd come up and he's reading a book and he's just stroking the animal, and suddenly the animal started to chew his hand off. He had to yell for help, and somebody came and shot the thing. Don't trust animals. So, what plants do is always the same, fixed by their nature. What dogs do, or other animals, fixed by their nature. That's how biologists often distinguish one species from another, because it does different things. So they'll call that a different species from that. It'll make a certain kind of mud nest, or something of that nature. But animals don't give themselves the purpose of the act. All animals operate according to a fixed purpose in their nature. Man alone gives himself the exercise of the act, the form of the act, and why he's doing the act. All three. Man is immanent according to all three. Brutes are immanent according to two only, and plants are immanent according to, they're singly automotive, if you like. Immanent, we say, or automotive, whichever you like to put it. So why they operate with brute animals is fixed by nature. The hairy Ammophila, for instance, the mother eats the father, then it goes and digs a little hole in the ground, or might find a little hole in the ground, and it also already paralyzes a caterpillar, drags the caterpillar down into the hole, and it's already paralyzed it by pressing the seventh ganglion nerve center, presses that and paralyzes the insect and puts it into a hole, then lays her eggs in the folds of the skin, so when the young are hatched there, they've got fresh meat and they've got warmth. The mother's gone off to die. Now, when the young are separated, they've been shown experimentally that the young have never met the parents. The father's been eaten by the mother and the mother's dead, and then they go and do exactly the same thing again. We'll have more to say about that. Well, so there are 3 degrees of life. We'll see there are other degrees too, but there are 3 bodily degrees of life. I remember hearing about one lot of life in Australia. A man went into a pub, and a very meek little man, and he walked in amongst all these big cattlemen in the outback. This meek little man said, "Could I have a shot of whiskey and a glass of beer, please?" The bartender says, "Yeah, coming up." He takes the whiskey, pours it in his top pocket, and drinks the beer down. The bartender looks at him. What the hell's going on here? He's saying to the cattleman, "Look at this nut. Another glass of whiskey, and another shot of whiskey and a glass of beer, please." Same again, pours the whiskey in his top pocket and drinks down the beer. Now he's starting to feel very warm. "Could I have another whiskey, please, and a glass of beer?" "Yes, coming up." So halfway through the glass of beer, he steps back from the bar and he says, "The cattleman, come outside, you fellas, and I'll take you all on one at a time." Out pops a mouse and said, "That goes for your damn cats too." Please take a break.